Land should never have become property in the first place. That is erroneous. Land ultimately belongs to no one. We have created a false mechanism here in putting in place the laws of property as something that then allows us to write a piece of paper and say we own this land. We cannot ultimately own something we have not created ourselves. Land is something that belongs to us all, for now and for future generations. It's all fine and well being up your mountain and shouting, I have rights, I have freedoms, but if you can't enforce the duties and the obligations and the responsibilities upon those who are breaching your rights, then those rights count for nothing. Currently, our laws are primarily governed by property laws. And this is really what we have to change, is to move away from property laws to trusteeship laws. So rather than I own, to I owe a duty of care to this planet. And what this means in real terms is recognizing that in truth we do not have ownership over the soils and the seas and the trees. We only have ownership over that which we create, that which we build. But the earth itself, the land itself, we do not have ownership over. We have created that idea. We have created contracts. Back in times of colonization, what we would do is we would literally stake our flag in the ground and say, I now own this piece of land. I write a piece of paper, a contract. I get that local chieftain to sign it, and I take it back into the government and say, I now own this piece of land. This is an artificial creation. We have enormous problems when we have landowners who exploit their land for commercial purposes. One example is what is happening increasingly is the draining of wetlands. What happens there is that, of course, where you drain wetlands, when you then have heavy waterfalls, that land is no longer capable of holding that water and draining it slowly outwards. So downstream you have massive flooding, which then creates an enormous amount of damage and destruction, not just to human habitats, but to wider ecosystems per se. This is becoming an increasing problem here in the UK. We're seeing this time and time again happening, where we've got mass destruction of natural habitats purely so that they can be commercialised, so that they can then be built upon, without thinking through the consequences of the damage for the wider territory and for the inhabitants of that territory. Because of course inhabitants aren't just people. When we have wetlands, for instance, where I'm from in the west coast of Scotland, we have very precious wetlands that are home to the famous grouse. That grouse's habitat are then threatened, and we have possibilities and problems with extinction of various species as a result. Now, this is in a small, almost mini ecocide context, but in fact this is what we're doing in the wider context out in the Amazon as well. We see it in China. China, of course, has had thousands of years of losing very fertile land, and as a result what happens is they have huge desertified areas, vast tracts of territory that are now just covered in sand. The rains come down, heavy downpours, it completely washes off any possible life there. Drains off, floods downstream, knocking out thousands and thousands of different communities in the process. Then it dries, and then we have huge dust storms that blow over cities. By putting in place an international crime of ecocide, what we're doing is we're putting in place a preemptive obligation, a duty of responsibility on heads of corporations, heads of states, banks as well, to decide in advance whether or not they're going to support, promote and actively work towards something that is going to be damaging and destructive to the planet. If we have the forest behind here being threatened with development, then given that it has a right to exist, it allows for lawyers to go in and make representations on behalf of that particular patch of the planet. But ultimately that's not going far enough. We actually have to leverage a duty of care on those who are wanting to go in there and destroy it. Rights only get us so far. We actually have to impose the duty of care. And how we do that is by creating the crime of the destruction. That is why ecocide needs to be recognised as a crime. People like me, lawyers, can then take prosecutions against individuals who are, whether for profit or for other motivations, going in and creating damage, destruction or loss of ecosystems. Whether or not that's a big corporate entity that's going in and illegally logging, or whether or not it's a landowner who is basically taking away his wetlands so that he can build upon them. I'm not against profit per se, but I am against profit that is destroying my habitat, the wider Earth community's habitat. This is a death by 1,000 cuts.